Hey folks, Joe Valley here. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Quiet Light Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by my Amazon guy. I know Steven personally. We've been on each other's podcasts a number of times. If you own an Amazon business, you can learn an awful lot from my Amazon guy on YouTube. He's got a ton of great educational content. If you want to level up your PPC, your SEO, your design, any aspect of your Amazon business, my Amazon guy can help you. Check him out at myamazonguy.com. Okay, so on to the podcast. Our guest today is Katie Ng-Mak. She is really, really impressive. Let me just say that first of all. She went to Columbia for undergrad. She has her MBA from Harvard. She worked for BlackRock. She worked for Bear Stearns. Was the first 100 employees at Hubspot, rose through the ranks there over a 12-year period, and then ventured out onto her own, decided she wanted to buy a business, not necessarily an online business. She looked at all sorts of different businesses. And one of the interesting things that we talk about here is that she did decide to join Walker Deibel's acquisitions lab. Even with her educational background and business background, she made the choice to join the lab and get some real experience and education on how to buy an online business, which I think was a very smart move. She looked at about 20 businesses. The one that she ended up buying, she bought with some of her own funds and SBA funding. She talks about that process a little bit, go into detail about due diligence, what she learned there. Again, with her background as a Harvard MBA and all the business experience that she has, she still hired two different types of due diligence experts. And we talk a little bit about the challenges that she's had, what she did during the training and transition period, all aspects of it. It's just fascinating to see somebody with her level of expertise and maturity and education and background to go through the process and how focused and diligent she was about getting it right. She took nothing for granted, didn't take anything. I want to say risk much. I mean, there's always risk when you're buying an online business. She talks about that as well. You just have to accept some aspects of it. But she talks about a little bit what she learned in the due diligence period and considered it, a bit of a roadmap on how to improve the business as well. It's just fascinating. So let's jump to it. Again, this is a acquisition. A 7-figure acquisition that Katie Ng-Mak made. Her advisor was Paul at Quiet Light. So let's take a listen, see what she's got to say. Katie, welcome to the Quiet Light Podcast.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me today.
I'm so excited you came to us via our mutual friend, Walker Deibel from the Acquisition Lab. You were I almost want to say a patient there. No, you weren't a patient. You were a student at the Acquisition Lab. But I'm looking at first of all, I'm looking at the email that Walker sent me, and then I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile. And Columbia, Harvard, you went to work for BlackRock, Bear Stearns, first 100 employees at HubSpot. And we know HubSpot well because Sam Parr sold to HubSpot. And then to the Acquisition Lab to become an online entrepreneur, or actually, that's not the case. You wanted to become an entrepreneur, period. Normally, Katie, I'm asking people to give some background on themselves, but I just kind of did it for you. But what a journey. Tell me a little bit about how you grew up and how you decided to go down this path business-wise. This is a very impressive resume you've got here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you shared the background, Joe, because I'm generally not comfortable, bragging about myself, as you mentioned. So I'm glad we got that out of the way. In terms of a little bit about myself, I'm Katie. I grew up in New York City in an immigrant family. So my family and I immigrated to the United States when we were 1. I would say that I grew up in a low income family, though I never felt poor. And in that community, I remember when I was young, one of the things that I've always been curious about are these small businesses, right? And I remember very specifically, there's this one noodle shop that is very popular in Chinatown in New York City, where I grew up. And it's very popular, as I mentioned. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, there are like employees here that are like serving these delicious noodles to the community. And one day my mom told me, she's like, oh yeah, like they're not employees. Those are the owners. And in fact, like they don't own like just this noodle shop and this noodle business. They actually own like a couple of buildings down the block.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're landowners. And actually they don't only sell noodles here. They actually distribute them nationally, right? Like they make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it wasn't just about like them being able to make a lot of money. Like I just thought it was really cool. Like they sell noodles to the community. Like they actually have a distribution business. They also, even though I didn't know that was what it was called, and like they clearly did very well, right? And they like made enough of a name for themselves within this immigrant community where people usually have like low paying jobs. And I also thought it was really cool that like they didn't really have to run this noodle shop. Like their owners, like they have buildings, but I think they found a lot of joy in being able to offer this low cost food that's really enjoyed by this community. And I think that's why they do what they do. And they work hard over the weekends to do that.
And to
And
be part of the
that's like one
community.
of my impressions of like a small business. And it stayed with me. I don't think I ever had felt like I had an opportunity to do this, just because as I went on to college and thought about what I wanted to do, one thing that was really important to me and my family was that, I would move into a high paying career just because I had student debt. I felt like it was important for me as like, a poor immigrant to just be able to be a success story. I felt like it was important for me to one day be in the position to support my parents if they needed my support. So just entering into like a career of success and like that offered a little bit more reassurance and predictability was important. And that was what led me into a career into finance and eventually into tech.
Did you find that you were working harder than your non-immigrant peers because you had to prove something, or you just had the drive within you versus somebody that, has been in this country for several generations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there are a lot of hardworking people out there, right? Like, I do think that even when I was working at HubSpot, a lot of the employees there, like, they don't share the same, like, recent immigrant story, but super hard workers. And I think the motivation was different, right? Like, a lot of my peers there were driven by, like, passion and just really wanting to make impact. I had that in me for sure, but I also think that there was this like separate narrative that was a big part of my life, and so I wouldn't say that like I had to work. I don't think that I had to work harder. I feel like I've met a lot of people who have worked very hard, but I definitely feel like there was this like need and desire to really like lift myself out of that community that I grew up in. It's kind of ironic. Like I love that community. My parents still live there, right? That's where their lives are. But I think the story of every immigrant family is that they want their children to be able to lift themselves out of it, not forget it, and come back and be able to help that community. But they really want their children to be able to lift themselves out of it.
Well, you've clearly done that. Undergrad at Columbia, MBA from Harvard, BlackRock, Bear Stearns, and then more small business with HubSpot.
Mhm.
What led you from the likes of BlackRock and Bear Stearns to HubSpot?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I will say this, like, I think I always kind of had this entrepreneurial itch. I never felt like I was in a position to stretch it, to follow through with the analogy,
Hmm.
but I always felt like I should prepare for it, right? And coming out of business school, like, honestly, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. It's really easy to tell the story of my career by saying, like, hey, during that time, I just saw that hot tech was going to like take off and I just put myself in a great position. It really was not the case. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I focused on what I wanted to learn. And one of the things I wanted to learn during that time was that I wanted to learn how to sell because I knew that one day if I were to own my own business, or if I were to maybe just even climb the career ladder in corporate, like being able to sell is just such a critical skill. And I'm a natural introvert. I'm actually very shy. So I never felt comfortable with conversations. So I wanted to challenge myself to just build that skill, get that under my belt, and then, maybe put it to use one day. So that was actually, and I got in contact with HubSpot because they had a sales job available, and I got connected to the founders through a connection, started my career there, and just ended up being there for 12 years because it was a great company with a lot of opportunities.
Well, it's incredible what they've accomplished during that 12-year period, and you as well. So congratulations to everything that you did there. I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, and it's talking very, very impressive, the number of different things that you did there. But let's jump to the entrepreneurial side of it fully, Katie. You bought a e-commerce business from QuietLight in June of 2022, just about 4 months ago, through Paul. I'm looking at the details of the business. It was a 7-figure purchase. There were a total of 5 offers on the business. Congratulations. You were chosen. The right person made that connection with the owner of the business. But prior to that, I think you went through Walker Deibel's acquisition lab. What led you to that? How did you find Walker? I know he's obviously part of the QuietLight team. He was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. How did you find the acquisition lab? And I mean, it by all rights and purposes, somebody's going to look at your resume and go, she doesn't need the lab. She knows everything. She worked at Bear Stearns. She worked at BlackRock. She's got a Harvard MBA. Why? Why do you need to go through the lab? So tell me about that aspect of it. Why you chose to do the lab?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say that probably like around 8 years into my HubSpot career, I started to get the idea of buying a business. And it was actually because I was being recruited by a private company. And I got a call, the founder and CEO of the company also graduated from Harvard, and it was clearly a recruiting call, but he was like, hey, I was wondering if you're up for meeting for coffee. I want to tap your brain for some expertise. We had a great meeting. He told me about how he had bought that company, that business, when there were only 2 employees, but he really liked the product. And then he grew it over the last 10 years to be like a very sizable private company. And actually, I believe they were acquired by like a public company over the past 2 years. And I just remember him telling me that story. And I walked out of that meeting, and I believe I actually said this to him. I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm actually not interested in becoming your chief revenue officer, because he did mention that there was going to be a role opening, but I want to buy a business like you. So can you give me some advice? And that began kind of like this, it just planted the seed of the idea of buying a business. And then after that, I just went into kind of like my network, basically asking the right questions. It's like, oh, I wonder who has bought businesses and how they did it. And again, I fell back to my Harvard connections, and I found out that a bunch of my classmates actually bought businesses through a search fund. Started to look into search funds, and came upon one of Walker's friends who was running the search fund during that time. And we chatted a bit, and I began to realize that a search fund wouldn't work out for me because my family and I live in Massachusetts, in a city in Massachusetts. Everyone's happy. My kids are happy. My husbands are happy. I'm like, I'm not moving. And I knew that constraint wouldn't work out well with search fund investors. So one of Walker's friends mentioned to me, she's like, well, I have a friend who actually started something called the Acquisitions Lab. He actually wrote this book called Buy and Build. Why don't I introduce you to him? And that was how I formed a connection to Walker. And then that's how I got pulled into the Acquisitions Lab. And then to answer your question directly about why do you need something like the Acquisitions Lab when you got a Harvard MBA? The thing is that buying a business and everything that you cover in MBA, it's completely different. Completely different. Today, when I explain to my friends who have never bought a business, what that process is like, I actually describe it as being really a process that's very similar to buying a house, right? The only thing is that, you want to buy a house. I actually feel like the process of doing so in a lot of markets, it's actually quite, it's quite mature. So you go on Zillow, you look at a lot of listings, you can probably call up a real estate agent, and then the entire process is actually quite mature.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I've learned is that if I wanted to buy a business, more on Main Street level, right? There's actually I really didn't have a real estate person I can call up to be my advocate. And then that entire process is actually not that clear. And in fact, the acquisitions lab and the Walker's book, I think have been the clearest resource to me around what needs to get done, how, why, when, and all the mechanics around that. And that's why I found the book and the lab so incredibly important.
Well, you're not the only one. I think they've done close to 100 million in acquisitions at this point, or people within the group. So it's true. The real estate market is very mature. You know how to buy, you know how to sell. It's pretty well known. Mm-hmm. And what we do through selling online businesses or people acquiring them, it's immature, right? I think, Katie, probably, of the 100 million in transactions that I've done personally, maybe one transaction had a buyer representative. It's just generally not what happens in this world anymore, or not anymore ever. And so the people on the sell side have to have the experience to help the buyer through that process. And doing what you did, you learned an awful lot about what's ahead of you, how to analyze a business, how to present yourself, how to prepare in advance, right? The aspect of, the search fund. If you don't have the funds all lined up and ready to close, and you're not the decision maker, and there are 5 offers, you're probably not going to be the one buying the business. So yeah. Let's address that. This is a 7-figure business. How did you fund it?
So through a lot of personal savings, and also an SBA loan.
Okay.
So,
savings and SBA. Good. So you had it all lined up. You probably, knowing Walker, you probably worked with somebody like Steven Spear from, was it eCom lending, or somebody else that you used?
I ended up working with Multifunding.
Multifunding. Know them well. Okay. So you had it probably pre-approved in advance. You did your due diligence. You got yourself pre-approved. They told you how much you could spend, what you could afford.
Yep.
And then you went out and hunted for that business, or
right.
a business that would fit that. Tell me about, that process. How many businesses did you look at before you made your first offer?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's interesting. I have a lot of peers in the lab who actually, I think, were much more diligent in the process and looked at a lot more businesses. I would say beginning to end, I've only looked at around 20.
Wow, that's impressive. Actually,
yeah.
When somebody tells me they want to buy a business, within the next year, it's almost like a full-time job. So
yeah.
Did going through, and this is, folks, this is not a sales pitch for the acquisitions lab. It just happens to be that Katie went through it. Did going through the lab short circuit that process in terms of other people that that did not go through the lab that ended up buying a business? Do you think you were able to analyze what you wanted a little bit more quickly and sort of narrow your search a little bit to short circuit
I absolutely think so. So there were a couple of things that were really important to me as I started analyzing businesses. The first one, I almost feel like people don't talk about as much. I think it's highly important. It was super important to me. I just had to trust a broker on the other side. And for better or for worse, I think this segment of the market I was operating in it's kind of messy, I like it because it means that there's a lot of opportunity. You just have to do some sifting. But I basically contacted brokers whenever I saw that there was a listing that was interesting. And I took a lot of listings to the point of having conversations with the sellers, but if along the way, I just felt like, there's something here that's not transparent, we're not on the same page, like, I was like, nope,
Good for
not
you.
engaging. Like, so that trust to me is super important. Like, I think, the foundation of business is trust, right? And
Absolutely.
this is
Absolutely.
through like every part of the transaction. And like the broker, like, is like the number one person. I feel like we're on like opposite sides of the table. Like, that was not how I wanted to engage in my first transaction, right?
Yeah.
Maybe later down the road when I'm a little bit more experienced, but not the first one.
Yeah, listen to that. People that are out there listening that are entrepreneurs owning their business. Forget about the broker aspect of it for now, but the number one foundation of it is trust.
Yeah.
You've got to build a business that's not just great for you, but that's going to be great for the next owner as well. And you need to be a trustworthy, likable, honest person, or highly qualified buyers like Katie are just going to walk away. They're just not going to trust you.
Yeah.
So beyond the broker, were there any opportunities where you had conversations with the sellers of the business, and after the conversation, you're like, nope, I'm out, because you just didn't trust them? You didn't feel good about the owner of the business?
Yeah. Like, I think I felt like, I'm not sure that like it was that I didn't fully trust them, but there was just something in like the presentation of the documents that didn't add up,
Mm-hmm.
right? It like I think it's either like the financials or like a strategic decision. And it like the information just didn't add up to help me get to a comfort level where I'm saying like, okay, like let me take the next step. I mean, I think that like, as an entrepreneur, like you do have to accept a certain degree of uncertainty, right? Like if you wait until like everything's all clear, like you actually like you probably will never have a deal. But like everyone has you have to like figure out where your threshold is, and if it ever crosses that threshold, like you just have to like end the process right there. So I definitely have had those conversations. But like besides the trust level, like the other element that just made it very clear is that it was just like the numbers, right? I had a certain budget. That was one constraint. And then I also had a certain expectation for the profitability for the business.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the segment that I was operating in, there were just so many opportunities out there. So I was just very stringent. Like I think in the beginning, I looked through more businesses just to learn how to read like a lot of prospectus, just to kind of get to know the process. But after a while, I was like, I just have to really stay disciplined. Like I can't talk myself into something that will eventually not be a fit.
Yeah, the discipline is huge, right? Some people just push, and they end up buying something they're really unhappy with because they set an unrealistic goal. Personally, I did that myself back in 2012. I bought a business that I shouldn't have bought. I pushed and pushed and pushed, and it ended up costing me about $280,000 because I lost every penny of it, Katie. It was a bad decision. Wasn't necessarily my fault. It was a Google algorithm update. So I get to blame somebody else. But if I hadn't pushed, I wouldn't have bought that business in the first place. So you never know what the reason is that you shouldn't buy it, but you should follow your gut. And I just didn't. I wanted it so badly, I made a bad decision. So the nice thing about buying with an SBA loan, in my view, is that it's not just you. You know that you're doing your own due diligence on this business. You're going to, run your own numbers, but you've also got, in this case, multi-funding also doing their analysis of it. Just out of curiosity, as a buyer with your level of experience, during due diligence, did you run the due diligence process on the numbers on your own, or did you hire an outside company like Centurica or somebody else to help you?
I hired an outside company. So again, like, I told myself that like, this is my first transaction, right? Like just bring in the additional support. Like don't nickel and dime that part of the process. You just have to like, bring in the experts who have seen this before and just like, leverage your expertise to give you a little bit of guidance. So I hired a team for financial due diligence. They also hired a separate team to do like kind of like operational due diligence. And you don't have to hire two teams. It just so happened that I wasn't able to find someone that was available during that time to handle both together. So it ended up being like two separate parties to handle that.
Who
And then I
helped
also
you
had
with
a
the
lawyer
financial?
help me out. Mhm.
A lawyer, yeah, you got to have that. Who did the financial due diligence? A firm? Anybody that we know of?
Yes. Oh man. I'm Cap Forge.
Cap
Cap Forge.
Forge did it for you. Okay, Matt Ramuzzi over at Cap Forge. Excellent.
Yes.
And the operational due diligence is interesting. How many employees of the firm were there? Not the firm, the company that you bought.
So the company only had two. The sellers are a husband and wife team.
Okay.
It was a small business, and they had a lot of manual processes, right? And so it was actually through working with the operational due diligence team where they kind of just flagged for me that like, hey, Katie, like we just went through the process, like, great news, like the books are very clean, right? Like a lot of everything that was shared with you is proving to be true. But one of the things that you really want to look out for is that a lot of the processes in running the business, it's very manual. And even the sellers during that time had mentioned that to me. And they wanted to just make sure that I didn't underestimate that how much time it would take to learn the process and also like transition it to an employee at a later point. So during the due diligence process, that was something that we definitely went back to the seller for to have a conversation and just make sure we're on the same page about that.
Did you extend the training and transition period after closing because of what you learned in operational due diligence?
Yeah, we definitely did. Definitely extended it, included, specified a very clear number of hours. I was told that it's a lot more than average.
Yeah, typically, folks, what we do is up to 40 hours over the first 90 days after closing.
Yep.
What did you wind up with, Katie?
We ended up with 3 months, 120 hours.
Okay.
I used up every single second of the 120 hours. And then on top of that, we also, agreed that if I needed more time, like how we would arrange for that. It will be off like a consulting fee. And I used some time too. Not as much as I thought I might need, but I'm glad that we actually defined that so that when we were there at the moment where I like need a little bit more time in that final stretch, like everything was discussed already. And I think that just made it easier for everyone.
I think relationships and the way you treat people are incredibly important in a transaction like this or in almost all aspects of life. But did you think about that, or are you just the kind enough person that you needed to have a strong relationship with the owners of the business because you've got to work with them after closing, and in this case for 3 months, 120 hours and beyond? Did you find that on that first buyer-seller get to know each other call that you just connected with them and that you found them to be honest, likable, trustworthy people? Or was it something that you had to build with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I found them to be likable and trustworthy, exactly as you described. I think our trust level like went way up during the transition process. Like they were just really awesome. Like I feel really lucky. Like I feel really lucky that they were as supportive as they were during the transition process. And I do think that that trust is incredible, right? And is important. And one thing I would say in terms of like, what made me feel such a high degree of trust with these sellers during the process, I felt like the trust wasn't just reflected in how they presented themselves during the calls. It was reflected in how they responded to requests. It was reflected in like clean books. Like one of the reasons why I bought the business that I bought is that the books were clean. Like
say that. I mean, if I could just shout that from the rooftops, people. I preach this way too much, right? Clean books, clean books, clean books. It's not perfect books, but it's clean books. So that somebody like you, Katie, can read a profit and loss statement and analyze it. Look at the balance sheet, look at the numbers, and go, okay, well, I can improve upon that aspect of the business. Their cost per acquisition is too high. Why did they hire that consultant? It didn't make sense. Just clean enough to be able to digest it is the key thing, because you're spending 7 figures here. It's a big risk. You're not going to have a second opportunity to spend 7 figures because you're going to be gun shy the second time. Your family's going to say no. You're just not going to have that second opportunity. So folks, if you're out there running a business and you've not hired a company, we'll call out CapForge because Katie mentioned them. If you're not hiring, an e-commerce bookkeeping company like CapForge, Seller Accountant, Acuity, there's a whole list of them. Go to the Quiet Lights / partners page, and there's a whole list of e-commerce bookkeepers that can help you. Please do if you're not doing it, because eventually you are going to sell your business, and your business is likely your most valuable asset. And if you don't get the numbers right, if you don't get the books clean, somebody like Katie not going to buy it. You're going to walk away, right, Katie?
Yeah, it was probably one of the most attractive parts of this transaction. The fact that it was like clean books. I had spoken with CapForge, and they told me, they're like, we really have, you can have like really good books, and we really have the books tie back to the accounts down to the penny, but these tied back down to the penny. And that was important, because what it helped me feel was that the reality is that you can poke and you can dig, and there's going to be a lot that you still don't fully get, right? Especially for a first time buyer. No MBA is going to prepare you for everything that you need to be looking for in your first purchase. But when you have clean books, you just trust that okay, if the owners brought this level of attention and detail to their books, they probably brought this level of attention and detail to other elements of their business. And it just kind of reflects on them and how they do business. And that's comforting, right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
So that was a big part of it. And it actually was part of what made me realize that this could be a good fit for me for my first business.
Yeah, I want to emphasize again, folks, that if you're Katie has an MBA from Harvard. She worked for BlackRock and Bear Stearns and Hubspot, yet she still hired a due diligence firm, a financial due diligence firm, and an operational due diligence firm. So as buyers out there, spend that extra bit of money. There's so much that you learn. You learn what's wrong with the business and how you can improve it and how you can make it more efficient. Wouldn't you say, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the due diligence process is funny because you kind of want, in a way, you kind of want them to come back and say everything's perfect. And the reality is that if they dig deep enough, there are imperfections to any business. And those oftentimes are your opportunities or some of the things that you should pay attention to sooner rather than later. And it's nice that someone kind of did some of the legwork to help you identify them. And then, once you go into owning the business, you just have to validate that process.
Yeah, they're growth opportunities more than anything else. It's this is what's wrong with it. And now you know how to fix what's wrong with it and have the business grow. Katie, you had 5 offers with a business. The business had 5 offers on it, and you were just one of them. Why did they choose you?
Oh, that's a good question. I wasn't sure how this whole process would work, right? I put in the offer, and then I didn't hear back for a few days. I thought that there might be some follow-up questions. I didn't hear anything, and I was like, they probably chose someone else, and so I'll just take this as a learning. But I was kind of surprised that they chose my offer. And if I were to guess, I would say a few things. One is my background. So I think the sellers saw my background with HubSpot, and the business is an online, an online store. And I think they felt as they look out into the business and and kind of identify what they think are the growth opportunities, they felt I would have one of the best shots of taking the business there. And, I happened to buy a business from sellers who had owned the business for almost 3 decades. So this is their baby, right? It's not just they sell the business and they're going to ride off into the sunset. They will, but they also really wanted to hand it off to see someone take care of it, nurture it and take it to the next level. So I think they felt like I was a good candidate for that, given my background. I think the second thing that I did is that I kept the LOI simple. So because I was part of the acquisitions lab, I leveraged some of the resources to put together an LOI and a letter of intent. And there were a couple of versions of it. And I basically chose like the most simple one because that's just my style. Like I don't want to like I just wanted to like keep the terms simple. I didn't want to have too many like you know, if this happens then that, if this happens then that. I didn't want to overcomplicate it at the level of at the LOI stage, right? And you know, you're a better judge of whether that's the right call or not, but I
It
felt
is
like
the right call. It is 100% the right call.
okay.
You know, there's my process, and our team does it a little differently depending upon the advisor. But when I had a business that was listed with multiple offers, I would not even want an LOI. In fact, I'd prefer that we use the Quiet Light template LOI, which I'm sure you have a copy of it through the acquisitions lab, because within each LOI, there's maybe 5 or 6 important bullet points: the purchase price, the time to close, the, you know, what's going to happen in due diligence, the non-compete, things of that nature, training and transition period, what you're asking for in terms of hours and things of that nature. There's only 5 or 6 of them. And I think it's best when there's a multiple offer situation that all of those things are listed out and can be viewed equally against all of the other offers versus somebody finding a template letter of intent online and filling it out and it's complicated, or even hiring an attorney for it, because the letter of intent is non-binding, fully contingent on due diligence and the further detailed asset purchase agreement. There's a lot to really get through before you have a legally binding agreement. Now, of course, with the LOI, it does become exclusive for a certain period of time, and it changes based upon SBA versus cash and things of that nature. But it doesn't look to me, as I'm looking at the closed sales report, there were 5 offers. It didn't go over asking price. It looks like it sold at asking price. My guess, Katie, is that it's all of the things that you said, and that they liked you, right? If I'd done my homework, I could have called Paul up and said, you know, were some of the offers higher than asking price, and he probably would have said yes. It was a strong multiple. It was, let's just say, in the broad range of 3 to 4. It was listed at a strong multiple because it's a strong business that's been around for a long time. That's just solid. I'm curious, Katie. It looks to me, as I look at it, it's in the air filter, water filter, humidity control space. That to me, it looks like there's a recurring revenue aspect of the business. Is that something that was attractive to you? And is that accurate? And is that something that jumped out that was really attractive to you?
Yeah. The recurring revenue aspect was definitely very attractive to me. They had a like average order value that was high because they sell like units, air purification units. They sell to B2B, so that was just a good fit for my background. And I find the whole area around air purification, water purification, like I felt like there was a topic area where like I can engage with the topic. Like I care about like air purification. In fact, I have air purification unit in my home. I care about water purification. In fact, I also have a water purification, like, you know, countertop solution in my home. So like I felt like I care about the products. I would be willing to invest my time and energy to build expertise in it. I also felt like the products were learnable. So if you started to enter into like a super highly technical product where you just need like a PhD in order to like be a qualified expert at it, then you know, I don't know about that fit. But you know, just given the fact that I care about it, I felt like I could be engaged with the product. You know, like that resonated with me quite a bit.
I think it's personally, I think it's very important. Some people just say, you know, it's a widget is a widget is a widget. And my belief is that when times get tough, and generally they always do as an entrepreneur, there will be a period when times are tough. I think the more passionate and interested you are in the product or service that you sell, the easier it's going to be to get through those tough times. Of the 20 listings that you looked at before you were able to buy this one, the other 19, were there some that the business was generally pretty good, but you weren't as excited about the product and therefore you chose not to make an offer on it?
Yeah, like I looked at a range of businesses, Joe. I looked at manufacturing companies that print, customized labels for products for other small businesses. I looked at a school bus company that drives kids with special needs. I looked at a like power washing company, but like, the business that does like power washing for like major trucks, right? So it's like a B2B sale, super interesting. Like, I think like if I were to think about all of those different like services, like the power washing company was most interesting in terms of like business model to me and with background. It had enough complexity, the financials were interesting, like the numbers kind of match what I was looking for. Um, like pretty cool market development opportunities that like match my skills. But then it was like power washing,
Yeah.
right? And like power washing and trucks. And there are people out there who will like, look at that and they'll be like, awesome. And then I looked at that. I was like, oh, okay. And I gave myself some time to see if my reaction would change. And then I was like, oh, power washing, So it wasn't the reason, that wasn't like the only reason I said no to the business, but it definitely was one of them. I was like, hey, this is a commitment of a number of years. And so I have to like be engaged in what's being offered to the end customer.
Yeah, 100%. And part of running a business are the people that you operate it with, the team that you're going to build. And
Yeah.
with power washing, I would imagine there's more people and human resources that are needed than the business that you bought.
Yeah.
Um, Katie, tell me about after closing. Any regrets after you closed on the business and you're working through that training and transition period of 120 hours with the 3-decade long, owners of the business? Did you ever go,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, what have I done?
So I don't think I have regrets, but there are a couple of things that like, if I were to do this again, right, like buy another business, I would do it differently. So like just, and luckily, right, just silly things. So, for one of the first silly things that I think I did is that, the sellers run their email on Microsoft. And I'm like a Gmail person. I've used Gmail through like my entire time at HubSpot. And I was like, oh, I should just migrate email from Microsoft onto Gmail and started spending time on how to do that. Started like looking into like who could potentially help me with that. I think around like 3, 4 days in, I was like, Katie, you idiot. Why are you spending time on like, a productivity platform like that when you're like, when you should just be transitioning? Like it's Microsoft. Like, you can send emails, call it a day.
Right.
So like just wasting time on things that like shouldn't have been prioritized that way. Like that's like one regret. Um, Another more tangible one, like I wish I like just knew bookkeeping better. Like
Mm.
I just if you've never done it managed, like if you've never been an entrepreneur, right? Unless like you were like your dad or your mom ran a business and you helped them like manage your books, you've probably never done bookkeeping. And for the business that I bought, like, you are like you just can't move unless like you have here in this case like QuickBooks sorted out. And that was just like I like there were just like little things I didn't know. I didn't know like I needed like I thought you could transfer a QuickBooks account over to me the way we transfer everything else. But that's not how it works. Like, and I didn't realize that until several days in. And then by the time I sorted it out, I felt like it took 2 weeks. And that's like a lot of lost time in a transition period. And it made everything way more stressful than it needed to be. So
Were the owners using QuickBooks Online, or were they doing a desktop version of it?
they had a desktop version of it.
Yeah.
And the thing is that their file was so old
Mm.
that it didn't really like transition as easily as I was expecting, as the people who were helping me were expecting. And I think that like, if I were to ever do this again, like buy another business, I would definitely prepare for that step a lot harder. I mean, it's no one's fault. Like, I think it's just that I didn't have the background
You were
to
unaware.
recognize that
Yeah.
I need to do some preparation there.
Yeah. Did you end up hiring a due diligence firm? Not a due diligence firm, a bookkeeping firm to do your books for you? Did you, I mean, financial due diligence was done by Cap Forge. Did you hire them to do your books afterwards, or are you taking that task on yourself?
I'm in the process of sorting out like I am hiring someone to help me with that. And I'm in the process of finalizing that.
Good, because you want to have clean books yourself, right? Because
Yes.
someday you're going to
Yes.
sell this business.
Yes, that is absolutely. I mean, that's something I learned, right? About like going through the process of buying a business. Like, and one thing I'm starting to think about is like, hey, like, you know, I mean, I put together a business plan like for myself when I was like, you know, during the, you know, in support of the purchase process. But I think, I'm guessing every entrepreneur does this. Like, now you're really putting together the business plan because you've come in, like you've dug into the business, you've validated certain assumptions, maybe you've invalidated certain assumptions. And now like you really want to think about like, how do you want to grow this business over the next couple of years and where are you going to place your bets? So I'm definitely thinking about that with the end in mind. And one thing I know for certain, like I have to have clean books. Like without clean books, like I just feel like you just also move so much slower.
You just used the word growth. Let's talk about that for a minute. You're only 4 months in.
Yeah.
In the last 4 months compared to the same period last year, is your business growing? Is it stagnant? Is it shrinking? And if yes to any of those questions, why?
Yeah. It's around flat. It's like honestly, I'm relieved. Like the reason why I'm relieved is for a couple of relieved for a couple of reasons. One is that, you know, I feel like I'm kind of buying the business in the eye of a recession, right?
Oh yeah.
And all of us are a little bit like, how's this going to impact my business? And you kind of don't really find out until like you see the numbers. So I'm around flat right now, and I am relieved about that. I'm also prepared for it, like trending downward a little bit in the coming year. I just feel like you just have to, like, you know, be prepared for a number of scenarios and know how you'll respond to that. Um, but at the same time, like, you know, I bought this business with the intent to grow it, so I plan to invest in it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that yeah, like it's flat. It's more or less what I expected, just because you know, when I was looking at some of the marketing investments coming into the year. But yeah, I'm planning to grow it.
I feel like flat is kind of a win, given the economic headwinds that we have right now. And you know, you could also say that, oh, it's grown by 30% over the previous year. And that comes with its own challenges as well, because then you've got to update your, you know, inventory projections and, you know, working capital to buy that inventory. And there's just different challenges that come along with crazy rapid growth. So I think taking over a business that's steady as she goes is a good thing, because you're really learning the ropes as you prepare for, you know, the growth that you're going to implement, and not in necessarily, you know, the next 6 to 12 months, but as you look at it as somebody that has been around and I think really has a business plan. You're not looking at, oh, I have to grow this by X percentage in the next 6 to 12 months. It's more, I would guess, you're probably got 5-year numbers and things of that nature. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, it's like, you know, I'm definitely like I came in with a 3-year plan.
Great. Okay.
And I'm definitely like extending a lot of grace to myself in the next year. I told myself that. So emotionally, hopefully I get myself there. And you know, I think it's a hard decision to make as an entrepreneur, because you feel like you just like took on this massive responsibility. You probably got agreement from your family members to do this. And this is kind of like a bit of your own thing, right? So I think, and then it's so different probably for many of us than what we used to do. So I think you put a lot of pressure on yourself to like get it right. So I definitely feel like I've put a lot of pressure on myself to get this right and get it right sooner versus later. And, you know, one of the things I'm learning is that like, you know, there's some of these decisions I have to slow down on a little bit and really just take the time to set up the foundation for a couple of things, and also like take the time to just make sure I truly understand like some of this stuff, right? Like, I mean, it's great that we're for HubSpot, but knowing what needs to get done is very different than like doing it. And some of the stuff I've never done myself, like I've never like done the actual work. And like, even if I plan to hire like, a service agency, like a service company to help me with some of these functions, like there's a degree of expertise I need to bring to the table to just choose the right partner and so forth. So like, I'm, definitely telling myself that like in the next, like definitely 6, maybe even at least 12 months, like I need to just extend a lot of grace to myself and the numbers will be what it needs to be. But like, I need to think much more long-term and build for the future.
Earlier on, we were talking about your education. You said you really focused on what you wanted to learn, which I think is just an incredible statement for students, right? I've got 2 kids in college, and I think it's what I'd like them to do: focus on what they want to learn, not what they think they have to learn. Now you're in a situation where, as the business owner, you kind of have to focus on what you have to learn.
Yeah.
As you need to bring certain level of expertise to the table. So I congratulate you on that. I wish you best of luck with that. I have the feeling you're going to do amazing things, Katie. I look forward to staying connected and learning how things are in 12 to 24 months. And when you sell this business for 10 times what you bought it for in 3 to 5 years, I want you back on the podcast to talk about your incredible exitpreneur journey. So we can do the full circle aspect of it. Congratulations on everything, and just incredible success story. Just in terms of your life, Katie, and your path and the things that you've chosen, the challenges that you've taken on, and now this new entrepreneurial journey. You've done it right because of the work that you've done with your, first of all, your education background, your work background, joining the lab, looking at as many businesses that you looked at, hiring due diligence firms, not just for financial, but for operational, doing it right, having that transition period. I have no doubt that regardless of the economy and what's going to happen in the next 12 months, you're going to do very well. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Katie. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, Joe. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Take care.
Folks, thanks for listening to the Quiet Light podcast. I have a big favor to ask of you, and that is just go and give us a review on iTunes. Tell us what you think. We don't ask for that much, and it helps our rankings and helps us reach more people. So please do that when you have a moment. Also, again, I mentioned it in the middle of the podcast. Please go ahead and check out quietlight.com/partners. It's our new resource partners page where you can find highly qualified e-commerce bookkeepers, tax advisors, attorneys, growth capital, acquisition lending, everything that you need to help grow your business and get you through due diligence if you're buying one as well.